Franco Impellizzeri, welcome to the show.
Thank you again for the invitation, and happy to be here again. Yeah, it was a long time.
Yeah. We spoke episode 17 the last time you were on the show with Christian Torborg talking about the Nordic hamstring exercise. So listeners kind of know who you are, but in light of that, because everybody knows who you are because you're kind of famous these days, Franco, I'm not going to ask who you are, what you do, what's a normal Monday to Friday. I want to ask you 3 or 4 quick questions right off the bat so we get more of an idea about what makes you tick. Is that okay with you?
Perfect.
All right, good. So number 1, what is your favorite sport or physical activity to watch, observe, or participate in?
Well, that's a tough question because I don't want to disappoint anyone, but my sport where I grew up is combat sport. So I love combat sports. I love boxing and MMA, any combat sport. When there is on the TV someone fighting, and always watch. So yeah, combat sport are my preferred, even if I haven't studied combat sports actually for various reasons, and also now not that much, but when I could, I also practice combat sports. Other than that, team sports in general, but now it's more complicated because in the last, let's say, 20 years, working this area, the when I watch a game, it's different. It's always trying to figure out something. So I don't really enjoy. While combat sport I enjoy because I don't think about any science or whatever. I just watch and enjoy.
You just get to switch off and enjoy it. Yeah, that's good. Okay, number 2. This is a bit of a personal one, Franco, so excuse me. What is your biggest failure? And what did you learn from that experience?
Well, I don't know if I can identify a single big failure. I had a lot of failures, and I think that what I could do is to use the failures to improve. And again, this is related to it's a cultural issue maybe, and is related to my history, because when you fight, when you lose, or you give up, or you train harder. And I used to train harder. So this is interesting because I'm actually working since a lot of time on a paper in which I want to show my errors. Because when you work a bit, now I'm working a bit in meta research, so I'm investigating the quality of research of other people, but people may complain because it seems they are pointing the finger, which is not true. Actually, this is meta research, and this is why useful. But that's maybe a topic for another podcast. But I was thinking that I can show using my errors what other people can learn. So I would say that I consider the errors and the failure part of life. I think that if you are smart, you transform these as opportunities to improve and to become better. And if you just leave these experiences in a passive way, you don't get anything from them. It's just a negative experience and nothing else. So yeah, I think I had my biggest failure probably is not related to science. It's more personal. For example, the time I didn't dedicate to my family in the past, that's probably what I suffer more. But yeah, now my sons are old. They're independent, so
living their own lives. So it sounds like being a good Bayesian, learning from your experience, right? Updating your beliefs and your priors. You try something, you fail, you try again with more information.
Yeah, the secret is avoid to start with too strong priors, because that's that, and this is actually part of my studies or my articles are pushing that direction. Because if you think that some intervention can be so effective, you start with a strong prior. When you implement or when you read literature not supporting this idea that you created in other people and in yourself, it's much more difficult that you change your behaviors or your practice. So having priors that are balanced and really commensurate to the evidence, for example, is something useful not only in science, but I think in life.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's something we should all strive to do. Sort of, however, we must say it is hard to do, isn't it? It's very uncomfortable to do. It doesn't feel good when you have a particular belief and something comes out that challenges that belief. And so I guess that's why you say keep your beliefs as neutral and as commensurate to what the literature says as much as possible, and don't get too attached to a particular belief.
Yeah, you should. This is something I suggest to my friends. Also, when you work for a team, whatever you say, don't be too prescriptive and don't be too. Don't communicate too much certainty. Because if you say no, we have to do this because this works, and there are tons of studies and these kind of things, and something happened that, in theory, should lead you to change idea, you don't, because you said something to too many people. You don't want now to change, or you want to avoid to look an idiot or something like that. So you have to prevent the situation that I know it's uncomfortable because it happened to me in the past. The difference is that when it happened to me, I also try to support my old ideas in a biased way, but I knew I was supporting something that in reality I probably didn't believe anymore. But yeah, so it's better to prevent that than to cure, So
Prevent is a topical word for today, Franco. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Okay, number 3. How on earth has Italy not qualified for back-to-back football World Cups? What is going on over there?
Well, I have to be careful what I say, but I think the problem is, this is something I experienced several times. Italy is a country where you don't always have the support that you would like or you would deserve as a sport system or whatever. And this is the reason why Italians are quite flexible, let's say, because we survive. We have to survive in several situations. So sometimes, even if we don't have the strongest team or the strongest support, in a way or in another, we survive. And surviving sometimes means also qualifying for the World Cup or winning the European Championship, and not qualifying after for the World Cup, because this happens when you don't have a system. I always say that when the successes are random, is because there's no system behind. So you cannot make systematic. The performance is very randonic, and this is, for example, something that in industry, in the process control, you try to control. If you read the literature on quality management, these kind of things, one of the first things you learn is that variation is considered an indicator of low quality, because when you cannot ensure the same standards, and you have very good products and very bad products, this is considered bad. And there's no system behind, or there's no enough control on the system. So I think the problem is that Italy didn't qualify because we don't have a system. We just survive day by day with random initiatives from some groups, teams, and so we can have this spike of excellence and this drop in the quality of the performance. Yeah.
Sounds like chaos. Okay, so I've been to Rome. I've been to Italy a few times actually, and walking down the streets of Rome, I was so overstimulated by all of the things happening, and it was cool. It was one of the best experiences of my life, but it felt like a chaotic experience. Would you say that that's chaos is not a negative term here? It's like a lively, everything's happening all at once. Everyone's doing their own thing. Is that like a typical kind of Italian thing without trying to stereotype?
No, I think that this is basically what I just said. We have we have a system that it's not under control. So this is a good or bad thing, because this allows us to be very flexible, because we have to adapt easily and quickly to several situations. You don't do the same thing. For example, you don't do the same document and you follow always the same procedure or the same. So sometimes you go there, you do the document, you make the document in 10 minutes, and the other time you take 3 days. So it's always random. Yeah, but that's absolutely, I think it's cultural. I think that Latin countries and, for example, Commonwealth countries, they have these differences. And I actually suffer both and enjoy both, because there are things that I like. Depends on the situation. From a professional perspective, I prefer a very under control system. I mean, I worked for 10 years in Switzerland, which is fantastic. Switzerland is really, it's true, is really well organized, and there are a lot of stereotypes that are wrong, actually. Like, they are a bit cold. That's not true. People I know, they are very friendly, and yeah. So yeah, your feeling was right.
Yeah, good. Okay, so hopefully everybody has gotten to know you a little bit better. Let's get into the meat of the conversation. I'm going to go straight to the heart of the point, which we're going to sort of anchor ourselves to today. Injury prevention, reduction, or mitigation. Where has all this controversy come from, Franco?
Well, I don't know actually why in sport medicine at one point this topic became so popular. I remember when I came back years ago, I read, especially on social media, someone complaining about this term, but honestly, I didn't care much. But over years, this topic is becoming more and more common. So the idea that you shouldn't use prevention. And in recent, probably the last year, this is becoming very strong. And as we have written, I don't want to say it's nonsense, because I understand some arguments that some people rise about the use of the term prevention, but most of the technical arguments are, in our opinion, wrong. So it's not if you don't like to use prevention, you don't use it. You use whatever you want. It doesn't matter. The problem is when you start to say to others that they shouldn't use it, because in that situation, you should have strong arguments. And I don't want to say evidence, because here we are not talking about evidence. It's more an opinion-based discussion, but the argument should be strong enough. You should have a sort of a logical consistency, and you cannot just say something to support, because in that case we enter more in a scientific area where the use of the terms have a specific meaning, and the problems should be contextualized. Because now I see that the narrative is a bit changing, and this is something I see often when you start to chase a topic. People change a bit, and they raise other arguments. There is a name for this that I don't say because it's very impolite, but there is when people jump on different topics, when you maybe support with good counter arguments. the original ones. So I don't know why it started, and actually this is indeed something that you see mainly in sport medicine. You don't see in other areas where prevention is used for any kind of disease, even severe and disease that can cause death, and they use the term prevention without problems. So you can see also policies that are where the term prevention is used. So yeah, I don't know why, honestly.
So what's the best argument that the prevention opponents, so the naysayers, those who are saying don't use the term prevention, what are they saying as to explain why they're so steadfast in why we shouldn't say prevention?
Well, if we start from what was said initially and what was written also in some papers, even as an opinion, but in some papers, there were technical arguments such as we don't prevent injuries in all individuals. So the only thing we can do is to reduce the risk, which is something that may sound right, but is technically wrong, because when you say that you prevent something in medical context, you are saying that you are either decreasing the risk or increasing the time to have a disease or whatever. So prevention is a general term that includes different aspects. And indeed, we have a primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary prevention. We actually have also primordial prevention, quaternary prevention. We have a lot of other prevention, depending when the actions, where the actions are compared to the initiation of the disease. So if it's before, after, during, and these kind of things. So the idea that you cannot use prevention because you cannot prevent an event in all individuals is technically wrong, because this is not what the term prevention in medical setting means. If we go to and we take the dictionary definitions, this may be the case, but I mean, I can find, when you look at the dictionary definition, you can find 10 definitions, so I can pick the one that support better my opinion. But here we are in a medical context, so we rely on the medical context. The new arguments are instead about the communication. And in terms of communication, I think there I can see the reason why someone may prefer to use the term risk, because they may think that saying prevention can create too much expectations. But the question is, first, if it may be a problem, but if this is a so big problem, why this is a problem only in sport medicine and not in other for other diseases, for example? So it seems a bit illogical. Maybe they have the same problem, but probably they didn't see this problem as big as we see. And the other issue is that this doesn't apply only to the term prevention, but this probably applies to any term that you use when you communicate with the patients, and you have to adjust the way you communicate and the terminology you use based on the person you have in front of you. So I don't think that you solve the problem eliminating the term prevention. You solve the problem eventually by saying to calibrate the terminology based on the patient and based on what they understand and what they get, because you can use even the term risk and they can attribute to a risk a meaning that is not the one that you wanted to communicate. Also, I'll give you another example of risk mitigation. We use this term mitigation, but mitigation, for example, I know mitigation because I had for some years some education in quality management. And the term mitigation in other areas is more mitigating the effect of something that already happened. So let's say you had an injury and you want to mitigate the effect of the injury. So in several areas, mitigation is used with this meaning. Is not as a synonym of reduction, for example. Is more to say something happened, and now we have to find a way to reduce the consequences of what happened. So again, if I'm a manager and you talk about mitigation, I can interpret it in that way. If you know I'm a manager and you know this differentiation, maybe you don't use mitigation, you use another term. So at the end of the day, the problem of communication is really an important topic, but is only marginal related to the abolition of the term prevention. It's more generic, and if you think that in your activity, in your communication, prevention created problems, you don't use it. It's fine. So I don't have any. People can use whatever they want. The article we wrote is not to say that they cannot use and they have to use prevention. We just said you can use prevention, and the reasons why people try to convince others not to use it most are technically wrong, some are partially true. So don't use it if you don't want, but don't tell me not to use prevention, which is used everywhere and technically is right in medical context, of course.
Yeah, you're not a prevention prophet. You're not out there trying to convert people to use the word prevention. You're just challenging this notion that we can't use the term prevention. And I think you're right in that mitigation and reduction have their issues as well. So if we're going to be a stickler for words, then we should face that as well. And I do love your point. The issue is, well, not the issue, the most significant part of all of this is in our communication and explanation. The term is one thing and it's a small thing, but it's our explanation to the person or the patient about what this might mean for them. And I think that's such a good point. We get stuck on the terms. Should we use this term? Should we use that term? Terms probably irrelevant. It's more the explanation that matters.
Yeah. I mean, at the end, if you think, for example, we use often the term risk, and maybe we communicate the reduction in risk based on the studies, and we say, oh, you can have 20% reduction in risk, but these are relative risk. And the way people can interpret this 20, 30, 40, 50% is most of the time is an overinterpretation, because it depends on the absolute risk you have. So a 20% decrease in relative risk, if the risk, or increase in the risk, if the risk is 5%, I mean, it means going from 5 to 6%, which is something that in real life probably you cannot see so clearly. But if you say, oh, there is a 20% increase in the risk, people may be scared. But if the baseline risk is 20%, of course, this means increasing an absolute risk which is much higher, and they can have also a much higher clinical impact. So even when we discuss about risk that we think is much clearer, it's not. It's not. There are a lot of situations in which we use the term risk, for example, in an inappropriate way. Most studies present odd ratios and odds which are not risk, or rates which are not risk, and people interpret as a risk. They are not risk. A risk is a probability statement and goes from 0 to 1, the probability of having an event. So if we enter in these semantic fights, I think there may be stronger arguments to question how people communicate things, because it's based on an optimal understanding of some basic concept, for example, of epidemiology, things that I didn't know years ago, and I realized studying, and I realized these are the errors I made. I said, well, I wrote things that are technically wrong, and I want to write this paper in which I want to explain what I did wrong, so that other people can avoid to commit the same error.
I like that paper idea, Franco. It sounds like the memoirs of Franco, what I did wrong and what you can learn from my mistakes. I'll definitely read it. Should make it a book.
That's the problem, is that there are a lot of errors. So after 20 years, it's too long. So I have to select the most important or the most frequent error. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I'm just thinking about all my errors, and it would make a long book. Anyway, so in the paper, Franco, I really love, or it was a really nice, elegant comparison that you drew with the polio vaccine as an example of disease prevention. Can you briefly sort of summarize this for the audience, and then perhaps related to injury prevention in the sporting context, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I mean, actually, some people told me that that part wasn't actually clear. The vaccine, because we thought it was a bit probably easier, but I now, because we mentioned the.
Okay, Franco. So one of my favorite parts of your paper, and it was a really elegant description and almost analogy, I guess, equating disease prevention with the polio vaccine, and sort of vaccine's a loaded term at the moment. Do you mind just sort of summarizing to me and the audience this metaphor or analogy that you used about disease prevention with the polio vaccine, and then perhaps relate it to injury prevention in the sporting context?
Yeah, well, we tried to use this example because we thought maybe more familiar, because the polio vaccine is quite popular intervention. And the idea was to explain that there may be different situations when you implement an intervention, and two of these situations are actually similar in terms of concept, even if they have different names. So when you say you cannot use prevention, we said you are saying that we cannot also use causal, because the concepts are similar. So basically, we explained that when you use a polio vaccine, you may have four situations. One situation in which people are considered doomed, because these are people that would contract the vaccine with or without, the polio with or without the vaccine, because they don't have maybe an immune system strong enough to react and create the immune response. Yeah. So these people are doomed. Whatever, even if you give the vaccine, they will have the polio.
So with or without the vaccine, they're going to get polio no matter what.
We have people that are immune, meaning that they wouldn't have the vaccine with or without the polio, with or without the vaccine, because for some reason they have a strong immune system. So not only they can fight the virus by their own, they don't need the vaccine. So these are immune. Whatever you do, if you give it or you don't give it, they are immune. And after, we have other two categories, which are the most relevant for this discussion, in which we have people that in which the vaccine is effective because they develop this response. So these are people, they may contract the polio without the vaccine, but when you give the vaccine, they will not. And these are the people in which this intervention was preventive. And after, you have people in which the vaccine create problems, in which there is a causal effect of the vaccine in terms of being harmful. So because if you use the live virus, they can actually develop, they can contract the polio. So the point is that the terms prevention and causal are using this classification just to define two different outcomes, but their causal effect is the same. One cause a beneficial outcome, and the other cause a harmful outcome. When they cause a beneficial outcome, they are said to be preventing. When they cause and harmful, they are said to be causally or causative. But the concepts are the same. It's just how you classify the outcome that change, and you change the way you define. But this means that if you're saying that you cannot use prevention, you cannot also say that something can cause can be harmful, because it's exactly the same. So are we saying that we should get rid of prevention and also of causal effects and harmful effects? I don't think so. But the point was to explain people that sometimes, and it's fine, sometimes we say things, we try to support our arguments, but we don't realize the consequences that these arguments can have in general. Because what we should understand is that if we don't want to use prevention for injury, we are saying that we don't have to use prevention for any other kind of diseases. So we can't just say, as someone told me, no, but it's more related to injury. No, it's not related to injury. This is related to everything. Or we use it or we don't use it. So that was a bit the example. But if you think about, for example, let's say, so that I don't touch the Nordic hamstring, sprinting. Let's say that we use sprinting to prevent hamstring injuries, like some suggested as potentially effective. You can sprint and you can be a doomed player or athlete, because with or without you would have an injury. So you are doomed. There are people that sprinting or with or without sprinting, they wouldn't have an injury. And these are the so-called immune. You can have those that with sprinting, they don't develop the injury, but without they may develop an injury. And after, you can have someone that they get an injury on the hamstring while they're sprinting for preventing. So in that person's, this intervention create a problem. So it was created an harmful effect. So again, you say that is preventive if decrease the number of injuries in that group if it's in a study, and you say that it's harmful if in those people in which increase the injury. The concept is exactly the same. Again, it's just that in one case, the causal process is the same, the causal link. So again, if you don't want to use prevention, it's fine, but you are saying that we don't have to use prevention.
Yeah.
You have to ban the term prevention in medicine, not in sport medicine.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, prevention is a causal term, and it's accurate to use. If you want to be strong in saying that you can't use the term prevention, then you probably can't use the term causation.
Yeah. Because the other argument that people use several times and still insist on that is that you cannot prevent the occurrence of injury in all the individuals, and therefore you just decrease the risk. Again, this is something that I try to explain technically. So when you run a study, what do? You compare the risk of injury in one group with the risk of injury in the control group and intervention group. And the difference in risk is the absolute difference, or the relative difference is the effect. Which means that some, in the intervention group, some athletes that were supposed to have an injury didn't have an injury because they were under the intervention. And the opposite occurred in the other people that were supposed to have an injury. They had an injury because they didn't have this preventive intervention, which means that in some people, you prevented the injury. And this is the way that our studies are conducted in any field. So it's never all or nothing. It's just a proportion of people that were supposed to have an injury didn't have an injury because of the intervention. And this is when you can say that something is effective. So it actually prevented the occurrence of the event in some individuals, and not in all individuals, but this is for any kind of intervention and in any study, unless is something is the so-called sharp causal effect, in which you assume that without that factor or with that factor, all the individuals would have or wouldn't have an event, which is an assumption that is made sometimes for statistical reasons, but it is not real, or is very rarely real. I mean, if you drink something, a radioactive substance, probably 100% of people will have problems. But if you exclude these extreme situations, normally this is happens. So again, yeah, it doesn't. We don't prevent in all individuals, but when you say that decrease the risk, it doesn't decrease the risk in all individuals too. Someone will decrease the risk, some others will not. So it's exactly the same situation.
An example that's coming to my mind as I'm listening to you talk, Franco, is seatbelts and driving a car. Seatbelts will prevent deaths. They're not going to prevent everyone who has a car accident from dying, but if you are wearing a seatbelt, you will prevent some deaths. So you don't have to prevent every single injury or every single disease or every single death in order for something to have a preventive effect, right?
In addition, also the belt can also cause problems. Rare situations, but it may happen. So again, as I said, if it's prevention or is harmful, it's just a question of outcome, the direction of the outcome. But you can't say, if you say it's can be sometimes harmful, you can say it's also preventive. Yeah. So
if we're going to use this term injury prevention, Franco, should we be careful in guaranteeing results? So should we be a little bit careful in our language here? Should we embed some uncertainty into our prediction whether this person's going to get injured or not? Or shouldn't we bother? For example, can we say that this program of exercises is going to prevent a shoulder injury next season? I guarantee it. I know what you're going to say here, but I'm setting you up.
Yeah, actually, this is a bit basically was my message with the Nordic Hamstring study. The point there was to say there is uncertainty around the effectiveness of this intervention, and we need to communicate this intervention. So I was against to say decrease the risk by 50%. First, because it's not true technically, because the 50% is from a random effect model. So it's not the estimation of the true effect of the intervention. It's an estimation of a distribution of effects, which means in some groups maybe 50, in some groups maybe lower, maybe higher, some maybe even harmful. So the point was that we need to communicate uncertainty, but this is for any kind of not only intervention for health, but also for training outcomes when you train someone. And I think this is the main problem we have, that we don't communicate well uncertainty, and we don't accept the uncertainty as professionals or practitioners. We don't accept uncertainty. We have really issues in dealing with uncertainty. It's like the difficulty to say, I don't know. There are people that they can't say, I don't know. Yeah, and so, yeah, that's the main point. But it's not related to the term. It's related to communication in general, because I can say this intervention can decrease the risk by 50%, and you are communicating a strong message anyway. If you say this intervention can prevent injuries, you are communicating the same things. If you say decrease by 50% the risk of injury, that if you think that what you're saying can create too much expectation because you're using the term prevention, you can use also something else. But sometimes when you speak with the patient, you don't even use risk. We say it decreases the chance of having something. So you can use so many terms, and it really depends. But when we discuss, especially to communicate with the papers or with between peers and professional colleagues, we need to communicate in a precise way. In our opinion, saying that is preventive is precise enough. We wrote the definitions from different the cancer associations, the WHO, and because, for example, if you read the definition, they say it's an action aimed to eliminate something. And people say, "Oh, you see, it's they wrote eliminate, yes, but it's an action aimed to." So that's the intention. Doesn't mean that you eliminate in all individuals.
Yeah.
So it depends how you interpret it. Because if you want to interpret in that way, okay, that's fine. But I don't know even how to argue, because it's a question of opinion. I'm not. My native language is not English, but the way I read and other people that around me read that is an action aimed to. It doesn't mean that it has to have an effect. If you want to say, I use the term injury prevention only for intervention in which I have evidence that they can really prevent or decrease their injury risk, this is again another kind of discussion. I may agree, but it depends, because if I say, okay, we are doing these things, these interventions to try to prevent injuries, I'm communicating some uncertainty. I'm not telling you, okay, I'm sure we are just trying. So I'm communicating to the intention of the interventions. But
yeah, there's in physiotherapy, we have something called the Kieran O'Sullivan test, and Kieran O'Sullivan is a physio from Ireland, and he proposed a number of years ago that after you finish perhaps explaining something to someone, say you're going to do this injury prevention program to prevent ACL injury, then you ask that patient or person to explain back to you what that means to them, right? So then you can have a conversation about, well, if they say, oh, this is going to definitely prevent my ACL injury, then you'll say, well, I can't say definitely. There's some uncertainty there, blah, 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 blah. So is that kind of what you're alluding to there?
Well, this strategy to ask the person to communicate, to tell you what they understood, I don't know when and how it was developed in physiotherapy, but this is written in several papers since probably 30 years, because also when I was in orthopedics, it was a common idea. So this is related to the communication issue. It's not medicine. It's in general in terms of communication. So this isn't something I read several years ago. So absolutely, I agree. If someone in physiotherapy proposed to use this approach, I agree. He or she, yeah.
Good, perfect. So finishing off, Franco, what are you working on? What myths are you busting at the moment? I know you're sitting there in your lab like an evil mastermind trying to bust all these myths that we desperately cling on to. So what are you doing right now?
I don't want to bust. I mean, I never wanted. I didn't wake up in the morning and said, "Oh, what do I bust today?" It just happened, and sometimes it happened for personal experiences. For example, maybe I have connections with teams and athletes and coaches, and maybe they always show me some literature, always, and when I say, "Yeah, look, this literature is a bit weak," and say, "Yeah, but is published here and there, the consensus, these kind of things," and maybe I speak with the doctor and say, "Oh, but I haven't read anyone complaining about this." So okay, so I have to write something so I can say, "Look, I'm telling you, this is not actually right." And I have also written in a scientific publication. So now I can, and that's actually one of the reasons why I did that. So I'm not, I'm really, my goal is to improve the research in our area. And I'm also in a moment in my career in which I have to make some decisions that I don't want to make, whether to do research in first person or to move in another area where I have to create a future generation of people that can do the research. And I probably move in that direction, because alone you cannot do anything. You need to build this new generation, because I know this may sound bad for my colleagues, but I think my generation has ruined this area, and so I think we need to fix, and we need to fix what we have broken. And I feel being part of this generation a bit responsible, and that's why I want to try to improve the area. What people in our area don't understand and accept is that the scientific process include discussion, and there's plenty of situations in the past in which scientists argue with each other. So that's part of the normal process of science, because since you want to defend your position, you have first develop arguments that are logically sound, internally consistent, based on good literature and evidence, these kind of things, and maybe they can stimulate you to do better studies. And the other problem is that when we communicate things to practitioners, I feel uncomfortable when the information I'm providing, I know they are potentially wrong, because I know the papers are weak and maybe biased. And this is something that we should avoid, because if we want to use the evidence-based approach, we should provide reliable information. And there's a lot of bias for various reasons. I have the advantage that I move in academia later, so I'm not really in this publish and perish battle. People say, "Oh, but you have published." Oh, yeah, but it happened. I didn't care when I was working in the first 10 years. My boss saw this as a waste of time, just to tell you. So I really didn't needed to publish. I was just curious. So the publications I have are just the consequence of my curiosity. And I can tell you that sometimes I give the idea to other people. I call friends and say, "Oh, this is something interesting to understand. I don't have time. If you do it, I would be very happy, and let me know the answer, because I'm curious." That's why I'm doing research. So I don't know what I'm going to do in the future, if I'm busting some other. There's something that we are going to chase a bit, but it's more statistical oriented. But yeah, it's a methodological discussions, which are not academic studies. People say, "Oh, but this statistical methodological, it's all academic." That's bullshit, because this has a huge impact in practice, because it is related to the information and to the reliability and validity of the information that we give people that are potentially going to use this information every day in their practice. So there was a discussion within our group about how to implement the knowledge, and they said, "Well, that's the last of the problem I have personally now. What I want to understand is what knowledge we need to implement, because we don't have to implement everything, because if the knowledge is not strong enough, it's also risky." So I think we need first to understand what's the knowledge that is strong enough to be implemented and disseminated. And after, we can discuss about how to do that. Because it's not true that the information don't reach the field. That's not true. There are information that reach the field too quick and too soon. That's a problem. I don't want to give examples because I want to be polite, but there are a lot of things that are absolutely at least questionable, and they are widespread everywhere. And if you read the papers, and I ask people from other fields, and they say, "I cannot believe you're doing that." And yeah, this is what I'm doing. So that's why I want to work. I'm working meta research and trying to improve the research. I want to give practitioners reliable information. I don't want to trick anyone.
Good. Oh, thank you for all that you do, Franco. You're making us all better scientists, better clinicians, and hopefully, by extension, improving the outcomes of our patients as well. So keep it up. Thank you very much. Before we go, Franco, are you still on social media? Where are you at these days? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm honestly, I'm less present on the media recently in the last year for two reasons. One is that I'm really, really busy. And the second is that I use the media when I need them and because I know how they work, but I don't want to be a victim of the media. So now I have seen also friends that are becoming very argumentative, because being argumentative is what creates visibility. So if I say this method can be done in a better way, no one care. If I say this method is a shit, all people start to comment, and I know this is how it works. So I can be, I'm honest. Sometimes I know, and in the past I use some posts in a stronger way, because I know that in this way I could reach more people and I wanted to communicate something. It doesn't mean that is because I'm like that. It's more because otherwise you don't have I cannot give visibility to some messages that I think are important. So now I'm a bit I'm staying a bit far from the social media. I use a lot actually, because I have a network where there are very good researchers, and from time to time I see the papers, maybe more methodological, statistical, so I download the paper, I can read the paper. So yeah, but I'm still on Twitter. Facebook is more for personal things. I don't use a lot of Instagram. I'm a bit of a mover actually with social media. People think I'm good, but I'm not. And I'm migrating on Mastodon, which is becoming is not so widespread as I was thinking, but is becoming a social in which there are more, let's say, technical information, especially regarding what I'm interested. So yeah, this is my presence in the social media.
Oh, good. I respect your not wanting to feed the outrage machine that is Twitter. And, you know, it's impossible to speak in a way on Twitter that someone will not misunderstand you and yell at you. And I'm experiencing that. I'm getting a little bit bored and tired of the whole thing anyway. So I respect you from removing yourself a little bit.
And you know, I'm the kind, unfortunately, because of my past in combat, I'm the kind of person that or move away or fight back. And I'm too busy to fight back, so I prefer to stay away, because if you slap me, it's more likely I give you a punch. That's the way normally I react. So yeah, I when I sometimes I see post and say I don't answer. You don't have to answer, because I know that I'm going to lose 1 hour if I do that. So
Totally. Take a deep breath and move on. Move on with your life. All right, Franco, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you.